This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Salmond. Welcome to Scotland Speaks with Salmond. Once again at our premier broadcast time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
Afore the football.
As Tasmina rightly says, before the football. And afore the family donders. Let Tasmina tell us what we've got in store for today.
Well, over the last year or so, there have been some reports of substantial changes in the politics of the north of Scotland. This came to a head last week with the defection of two significant figures in the Highland SNP, Energy Specialist Steve Chisholm and Councillor Karl Rosie, to Alba. Today we ask, is this the shape of things to come or just a flash in the pan?
Now, Tasmina and I make no claim to be impartial on this subject, so who better to tell us what's going on than the man who became Alpa's 5th elected representative this week, Councillor Karl Rosie of Highland Council, and that rebel MP for the Highland year, that young Lochinvar of the Islands, Angus MacNeil.
So why are the SNP breaking hearts in the Highlands? And is this a light in the north for the prospects for Alba? Well, earlier this week, Alex spoke to Angus MacNeil and Karl Rosie.
Well, firstly, Councillor Karl Rosie, you've become Alpa's 5th elected representative and our first ever elected representative in the Highland of Scotland. So what was it that brought you across to Alpa?
Well, there were several factors, Alec, when I would imagine that near the top of the list was the issues relating to Fergus Ewing, which I found very disappointing. But I think the concluding factor for me was that I recently received an open letter from our local community council, and they detailed a list of challenges that we've got in our own area. And when you give some consideration to these, the issues they permeate across the Highlands, and it really did have a profound effect on me. So that, along with the desire to find solutions for those problems, that's how I arrived at the decision to join the Alba Party.
And your ward is pretty far north in the mainland of Scotland, is it not, Karl?
It certainly is. You do not go any further north, Alec, but there's some fantastic factors that persuade me to be here. A county that's full of energy, and its people are full of energy. But as I say, they have been expressing their discontent for quite some time now, and they look for solutions now. So it really is a fantastic place to stay. Renewable energy, everyone understands what opportunities we've got. And again, that's something that's available to us across the Highlands.
Now, Angus MacNeil, from your Western vantage point, do you recognise some of this story of neglect of the north of Scotland that Karl Rosie is pointing to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever I've been in Caithness and around Thursday or Wick or wherever, you see what a fantastic area is. Very good ground, I've got to say, as a crofter from the west. I do envy that. But when you go further north than Thursday and Wick, and you go to the Faroes and you go to Iceland, you go to Norway, there's no reason why the things Karl Rosie's outlined should be the way they are. And, it's in the hands of the Scottish government to make some change about that. And the fact that they're asleep at the wheel on independence is the thing that annoys me most. And all the problems that the community council wrote to Karl there, I'm pretty sure that if I took that letter to Faroes or Iceland or Norway, I'm sure, or even Ireland, I'm sure we'd get answers an awful lot faster. That's because they aren't tied to the economically the extremists of economics that we have of the Tory party at Westminster. Unless we free ourselves from that, or their apprentices in Labour, we're going to have the same stuff. You're going to have community councillors writing to councillors for years and years to come, and we really have to get this changed in Scotland.
Now, Karl, Rosie, you've taken on a pretty substantial task of being the main drafter, along with others, of a specific Highland and manifesto for Alapa. What's going to be the sort of thing that features in that call to arms?
Well, look, I really look forward to that. And even in the last few days, Alex, I've had some really exciting conversations with people who want to contribute to that. Really exciting stuff. And for me, that presents a level of opportunity I've got. I think Angus just touched on it there. When you think of the modern progressive democracies across the globe, and then compare and contrast where we are in the Highlands, and in my area, you can think about transport as one example. Now, you can get on a train in Edinburgh and you can travel to Paris. You can be on the Champs-Élysées drinking a coffee, watching the world go by, and it's quicker than that journey will take to get up to Wick here. So, these are the type of policies that I want to see, and I've no doubt that's what we should not be surprised when we face depopulation figures. How can we expect young people to consider to make a future where they remain in the Highlands and contribute to the services that we all expect and deserve, and be creative and content with bringing up families in an area when we face these situations? So I think we've got to absolutely tap into the opportunities that we have, design a manifesto, and it's so key, Alec. What people say to me, what's appropriate in Loughinver, it's certainly not appropriate in London, not in either Galway or Glasgow. So people want to, and they've got the solution. So we need to ensure that we empower them. We can do that through design and local government and ensuring that funding is there, and working in collaboration and partnership with industry and business. So that's the type of manifesto I want to build, and I will work with anyone who wants to contribute to that in a meaningful way. And Angus, delighted to work with you on that topic.
Karl, I'm just listening to what you're saying there. I mean, you're absolutely bang on about the depopulation stuff. I think by 2050, the population of Ireland is going up 20%, Iceland 32%, Norway and Denmark up 15%, Faroes up yet another 6%, and we in Scotland are meant to fall. I think the Hebrides that are the worst of that, and the Highlands wouldn't be far behind. Yeah, and so I mean, you've got a lot of assistance there, but if I can contribute in any way, I'd be happy to help. And obviously a Scotland United banner, but we've got to move things forward in Scotland. And one of the other things I feel that when we're moving forward in Scotland, we should have maybe a Swiss idea, with 26 cantons rather than a centralised country. And I think if there's a criticism I have to make of Ireland, is that they centralised in Dublin, almost making themselves a mini Britain, if you like, when they should have perhaps decentralised in Ireland. And we can be ready for that in Scotland. And you're right, the problems, whether it's Galway, Loughinver, Wick, Thurso or wherever, aren't going to be sorted by London. But also, we don't want to be explaining these things to people in Edinburgh either. We want to be able to have the powers ourselves to describe things. Obviously, explaining things to people in Edinburgh is a lot easier than people in London. However, let's make sure that we have powers going forward. That's going to mean something really tangible for those population figures I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned as well.
Well, when Karl was speaking about drinking coffee in the Champs-Élysées, I immediately thought of you drinking coffee, Angus. But you made
I never touched the stuff, Alec. Never touched coffee at all.
Well, you've made a substantial offer to Karl. Karl, are you going to take Angus up in his offer to contribute to your manifesto from an island perspective?
Absolutely, Alec. And I would imagine that Angus and his constituents would recognise, apart from the separation of water and the initial journey, we face very much the same challenges. But crucially, I think we've got the same opportunities. I've touched on that already. So absolutely delighted to work with Angus or anyone else who, we need positive, solution-focused minds to get on the issue. So I can't wait to get stuck into it, Alec.
So both the Highland and Caithness have huge reservoirs of power. You could have electrical power coming out your ears in the north of Scotland and the islands. So what sort of industries can you see, Karl, that might be attracted to these sources of cheap, renewable, clean, green energy?
Well, the pleasing thing for me, Alec, I know that there are discussions ongoing in regard to that. And we've seen recently with the investment at NIG, where we have Japanese inward investment for cable manufacturing. But there are a range of other things that we could be doing in terms of increasing manufacturing. And it's really important to recognise, I think, of the 6 major European countries that are involved in the wind sector. So that is Denmark, France, Germany, Spain, Italy. The UK are at the bottom of the league table in producing and manufacturing things because we buy things instead of making them. So we need to create an industrial strategy where we address these issues and make sure that we land the opportunities in the Highlands. I want them in the Highlands first, if at all possible. We can have them in Scotland elsewhere, but we need to start creating these opportunities for our young people to give them confidence that the Highlands is the place to be.
And Angus MacNeil, just on the power, cheap power, I mean, can you see industries perhaps bringing into reality Leverhulme's dream of industry in the Western Islands? Can you see that cheap power being the key to unlock that door?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole school of thought that says that a company should be relocating to where the energy is. I mean, we have constraint payments on energy going south that's being produced or could be produced that can't be used because the transmission lines aren't there. A short glance at the Icelandic power structure or energy production in Iceland, only about 20% of that is used in Icelandic homes. The rest is used primarily in aluminium smelters and quite a lot of it in data centers as well. And there's a whole array of things that can come to you once you create the possibility. I mean, I probably can't imagine every possibility that would come, but I do know that if we do have the power there and we have a zonal or nodal energy structure in the UK, but probably a zonal one, these things would change now. And again, moving forward to an independent Scotland, let's think about what we want our independent Scotland to be like afterwards, not just a mini Britain, as I think Ireland, as I said earlier, has made itself.
Now, Karl, Rosie, you coined a phrase in your declaration statement. You said you stood for independence for Scotland and home rule for the Highlands. So what do you have in mind in terms of your...
We're on the same wavelength.
What do you have in mind in terms of your home rule for the Highlands?
Well, I think our communities in the Highlands, they've been expressing this desire for some time. They absolutely understand what the issues are in their localities. And I think if we can empower them by doing the right thing, so that's, creating, when we're raising taxation, enabling them to spend that money because they know where to spend it and what the issues are, and creating opportunities. So, I really do think there's an opportunity to redesign local government in our area. And as I said, even over the last few days, had some really exciting conversations with people in the community approaching me and suggesting how they could do that. So, I look forward to sharing that, developing it. We need to understand how we deliver it. So, that's a prize for me, and it is very exciting for me.
Angus MacNeil, I'm going to give you the last word. And as you know, the First Minister is a regular viewer of this programme. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to spell out to him, once again, the independent strategy that's shared by Alapa and yourself as an independent nationalist in Scotland United. Spell out for Humza how to get independence, Angus.
Well, he could do it quite easily. Of course, he could call an unscheduled election at the Holyrood Parliament and use the ballot boxes there, and then any week he chooses to. He could also take up the cudgels of the gauntlet thrown down to him by Ash Regan, moving forward and asking the people what do they want the power to decide if Scotland should be independent or not. I mean, for goodness sake, Humza, do something. Sitting around saying you can't do anything or telling us that Keir Starmer is going to give us a referendum is patent nonsense. He knows this himself, telling us that Keir Starmer is going to have a majority. Why is he doing this? He should be campaigning for Scotland, not being a spokesperson and a PR agent for Keir Starmer. Things need done. Karl Rosie's outlined what needs done. It can be done. And, to go a wee bit further north from Karl there's a population of the Faroe Islands, 52 or 53,000, maybe as high as 55 now. It keeps growing. But anyway, they can do so much for themselves. And if they can do it in the Faroe Islands, which is geographically a far worse bet than the Hebrides or Caithness, then we can do it as well. But we won't do it unless we move in Scotland to take the powers that we need and away from the economic extremists at Westminster, which are the Tory party and their apprentices in Labour.
So at each and every election, you look for an independence mandate at the ballot box. Is that what we're agreed on?
Well, I don't think we would need many elections, to be honest with you, Alec. I mean, I think if the SNP were to do that now, they might find themselves with an independence mandate with after one election. But, you know, I've been calling for this now for a number of elections. I remember writing before the 2021 election that the 2026 election was going to be the 2021 election for slow learners. I'm beginning to think I was a bit optimistic back in 2020 and 2021 that people would learn in the intervening 5 years. I mean, I think we're going to have to get through the Westminster election and see that they get nothing from that. And hopefully the SNP membership and the rest of those who support independence wake up and smell the coffee around this, or else it's another 5 or 10 years wasted. I mean, this is serious stuff, and people's lives are affected and being blighted as a result of not having the powers that we need. And populations are declining when they don't need to be declining.
Now, just one tip, Karl, when you're phoning up Angus for his contribution to the Highlands and Islands manifesto, make sure it's reverse charges. Councillor Karl, Rosie, Angus, Brendan, MacNeil, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back. Now, last week's show was about the social media and Scotland's preeminent blogger, yes, Wings Over Scotland, the very Reverend Stuart Campbell. Now, typically, the bold Rev Stuart attracted a record audience for this series, showing the interest and power in what Wings has to say.
Well, I mean, Wings has already set out quite some time ago, before even Humza Yousaf was leader, what we think the SNP's independence policy should be. And it's to have, as an article of basic principle in their manifesto, that any election in which pro-independence parties get more than 50% of the vote is in effect a declaration of independence, or a mandate for a declaration of independence. So, and the thing about that policy is it actually takes independence out of the day-to-day political equation, because you just say, well, obviously that's what the SNP should stand for. So in the meantime, we're just going to get on with doing a job of governance. And then when it comes to election time, you know what we stand for. And if you want independence, vote for us. And if we get more than 50% of the vote, that is a mandate that will stand up in the eyes of the international community. And then you just take action.
And this is what you had to say about the Reverend Stuart Campbell's appearance on our show last week. Tarascal says, a very good watch and explains the independent situation exactly as is. We're in no man's land at the moment. Dr. Alan McManus says, interesting and informed take on the Scottish independence movement and the party standing in the way, by Wing Scotland on the Alex Salmond show. Sky 37 Blue says, fantastic. Stuart Campbell has done so much for the independence movement. Great to see him here. Stacks a Lot says, that was a braw watch, enough to prize me away from the bikes. Many thanks. And finally, Andrew Murray says, excellent discussion and analysis. Well, thank you very much indeed for your tweets, emails and messages, or should I actually say correctly, X's emails and messages. Please do keep them coming in because myself and Alex occasionally likes to read them. And now to Scotland's Hidden Heroes, in association, of course, with Flagship Media. Now, last week, Alex got some stick for including a unionist, David Maxwell Fyfe, in his pantheon, about which he is totally unrepentant. But this week, you'll be pleased to hear he is back on firm nationalist ground, but not, as you will hear, uncontroversial ground. Over to Alex.
Let's take you back to the 1970s. If you'd been asked a question then, who are the best platform political speakers in Scotland, you would have said people like Jim Cllr, JP McIntosh from the Labour Party, Margaret MacDonald, and then you might have said Willie McRae. Willie McRae was a firebrand speaker, one of the finest platform speakers ever in Scottish politics. And he was unusual in the sense that Willie tended to concentrate on the issues in the Highlands and Islands. He was a fiery speaker, he was a ball of fire in a platform, and he had the most extraordinary life story. As a young student at Glasgow University at the start of the Second World War, he volunteered to Dunkirk, the British Expeditionary Force, became an officer, got injured, wounded, invalided out, and then in a scheme that operated then, it was an invalided British officer could become captain of a destroyer in the new Indian Navy. And that's what Willie became. So Willie was the captain and had an Indian first officer and an Indian crew. His destroyer did its sea trials in the Clyde and up the west coast of Scotland. He sailed into Cllr one night and almost broke the boom which had been placed across the Kyle, and served through the war in the Indian Navy. At the end of the war, as India approached independence, and because Willie had learned to speak Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, all of the languages, he was used as an interpreter as the Raj explained to the Indian masses how His Britannic Majesty had graciously decided to give them independence. The only problem is with Willie as a translator, because Willie had joined the Congress Party. Well, they said King George has graciously decided the Indian people should be independent. Willie was translating it as saying that, these bunch of creeps are finally getting out of your country, having stolen your resources for the last 300 years. So Willie was an Indian nationalist as well as a Scottish nationalist. He unfortunately caught malaria, so he was sent to the Mediterranean, where he was intercepting Jewish convoys in the 1946, 1947, and of course had a great affinity because of the refugees who had been in the concentration camps in Europe going to Israel. And he was pro-Israeli for the rest of his political life. He went back to Glasgow University, finished his degree, and almost immediately became a partner in Levy and McRae, the prominent Scottish legal company. He was a firebrand solicitor, a great defence criminal lawyer, and a campaigner for the Highlands and Islands, and a fierce anti-nuclear campaigner. He enlivened the SNP conference in the 60s and 70s. He failed by a fraction to win Ross Cromarty and Skye in 1974. And I met him for the first time as a young whippersnapper in 1977 when he plucked me from an SNP conference and asked me to accompany him on his tour of the Highland constituency he was trying to win from the Tories. It was one of the experiences of my life. I'd never heard speakers like it. Let's say this, when Willie McRae was speaking on a platform, let's say in Ballintor and Caithness, then every laird for 100 miles radius should have hidden in the cellar, given what Willie was about to do to them. So Willie was a Highland radical in the SNP. a great figure in the party, a great anti-nuclear campaigner in Milwaukee, and also what was happening in Caithness and the plans to dump nuclear waste in Dounreay. And perhaps these were the issues that led Willie to his untimely death in 1985, when a very curious set of circumstances, when he was on his way to his family home in Cllr and his car crashed and he was found dead, and only later it was discovered that he had a bullet wound, apparently in his right temple. Since then, over the last 40 years, there's been huge controversy about the circumstances of Willie's death, particularly when a policeman from Glasgow revealed just a few years ago that he knew that Willie had been under surveillance from various sources. He wasn't quite sure, security forces, perhaps NIREX, the nuclear campaigners, but certainly under surveillance. The policeman knew that and testified to that fact. Even more so, only a few years ago, when the nurse who treated Willie in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary after the accident that was to prove fatal, revealed that in her opinion, the bullet wound was not in his right temple, as had previously been suggested, but in the back of his neck, which would be a very unlikely way for somebody to take a gun and shoot themselves. Now, at the time, back in 1985, there was substantial controversy about Willie's death, and you may ask, well, why didn't the SNP push harder to get a full investigation? Well, in the fairness to the then SNP leader Gordon Wilson, the family, Willie's family, were convinced it was a suicide and were very unwilling to see publicity on the matter. And when Winnie Ewing investigated it, she came up against the same barrier. But the questions remain. When I became First Minister, I asked the then Solicitor General, now then became Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland, to take a look at the case to see if there were any reasons for reopening it to have a full inquiry. And at that time, he couldn't find them. But the controversy has raged on, and given the nurse's testimony from 2018, my own view is it's time to have that re-look at the circumstances of the death of Willie McRae. In terms of his entry into our pantheon of hidden heroes, I think the key point is this: we're not judged by how we die, but by how we lived. And Willie McRae led one of the fullest lives imaginable. A war hero in many ways, a colourful, extravagant figure. He bestrode the political scene in Scotland, and particularly in the Highlands and Islands. And his speeches about land reform, his speeches against landlordism, his speeches for the common people, about how the resources and land in this country should belong to the people. Well, let's put it this way. If Alapa is now lighting the fiery cross across the Highlands and Islands, they would do a great deal worse than to follow in the footsteps of Willie McRae. A very worthy entry in our pantheon of Scotland's hidden heroes. It was only about 20 years ago that I fully understood the issues which still beset the economies and peoples of the Highlands and Islands. A great pal of mine, Dennis MacLeod, took me on a tour of the North 500 before there was a North 500. And I was astonished over a period of several days at the emptiness and the great beauty, of course, of the landscape, but of the straths and the glens, which had once been populated with thousands of people, were totally, utterly empty, and still the case because of the clearances, because of land changes, because of the politics of periphery, because of all of these things. And it makes you think, could that be changed? Well, of course it can be changed. And listening to Karl, Rosie and Angus, MacNeil today, you can see that some people have the ideas to change it, because this peripheral area, the ones used to call the ends of the earth, the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, has some of the greatest natural resources in the world, and that key natural resource, of course, of energy, of abundant, cheap, plentiful supplies of energy. And it shouldn't be beyond the wit of people to devise an industrial strategy for the Highlands that see a repopulation of these incredibly, astoundingly beautiful areas. Because there are industries which require power. Because if you've got lots of power, you've got two choices. You can either ship out the power by transmission line and land or at sea to other centres of population, or alternatively, you can attract industry to the power. And it's quite clear that both Angus, MacNeil and Karl, Rosie have the latter in mind, and they are quite right. So I'm looking forward enormously to see the emergence of this manifesto, not just for the Highlands, but for the Highlands and Islands now that MacNeil's involved. I'm looking forward to that, because I think it will bring forward innovative ideas which will hopefully light a fiery cross for Alapa across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland.
Welcome back. Well, there is only one fitting way to close our programme on the politics of the Highlands, and that is with a photo montage of some of the most famous scenes of this most beautiful part of Scotland. So enjoy that as you watch the closing titles. We look forward to, of course, seeing you again next week at the same time, in the same place, for the Fitba, as Alex used to say, but I now say. And of course, on every social media channel going. So take good care of yourselves until then. And those of you like me who are fasting, have a very happy Ramadan. May you indeed be extremely blessed through this month. And remember to give to charity. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Bye-bye.